I know everyone loves talking about self-love, but before you get to this point of self-love, you have to take inventory of what's already inside you. So everything that comes out of you is only a reflection of what's already. Hey there, kings and queens, and welcome back to another episode of Faith Helps Podcast, where we bridge the gap between faith and psychology, all in the effort to show you that you need both in order to become the best version of yourself. And by best version of yourself, I mean that version that God intended you to be all along. My hope is that you leave every episode feeling encouraged, inspired, healed in some way, in some area of your life, but most importantly, challenged to continue working towards that best version of yourself. And today is no different. I'm your host, Dr. Diamond Booth. And if you're experiencing a lot of challenges and turmoil in your relationships, this episode is one that you don't want to miss. Now, I know tomorrow is Valentine's Day. You probably got your outfit picked out and your dates lined up, okay? That's all fine and dandy. However, you're going to fall flat on your face if you're not intentional about the foundation of your relationships. I want you to take a moment to just scan through your relationships, whether they're romantic, platonic, hookups, family, friendships, whatever they are. Just take inventory of them and notice what you're seeing. And also notice what you see about yourself. See, yesterday I was thinking about this parallel between Eve in the garden and our relationships with ourselves and then our relationships with others and how they all interconnect. And that's what I want to break down in this episode. So if you're familiar with the story of Eve in the garden, Genesis 3, the serpent came to her when she was at the tree and planted the seed of doubt and asked her, did God really say blah, 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 blah? Long story short, she ate the apple, gave it to Adam, and ruined things for all of us for the rest of our lives. Now, go read your Bible if you want the accurate story, but that's basically what happened. I'm just saying. So as I was thinking about that, I was thinking about how the enemy's plan the whole time was to sow division between mankind and God. And that's exactly what he accomplished. And it's no different in today's age. His plan is still to create division between man and God and for us to separate ourselves from that. But he takes a step further and also creating division between us and our relationships and our communities here on earth. The first part is acknowledging the first attack is going to come from your relationship with God. He's always going to look for a way to plant a seed of doubt or insecurity to turn you away from God. And that happens through trauma, because we end up blaming God for the trauma and turning away from him. It happens through when we don't get what we've been praying for, that job opportunity or that advancement in our current career, and we turn away from God. We feel like he's neglecting us or ignoring us, or we get resentful. He keeps replaying the same patterns just with new people and new seasons of your life. And when you are in a beginning season of anything, you have to be very mindful of what seeds are getting planted in that early season, okay? Because you don't want to harvest the wrong things or unhealthy things later on in your life, or later on when you are trying to transition to a new season of your life and God's like, sis, run that back. We got to redo it. There's some things that we missed. There's some things we let slide through. And that's exactly what the enemy does. He slides in, creates this wedge that grows and grows and grows. If you think about your relationship with God, what are some things that maybe you withhold from God and you don't surrender to him because you don't trust him? Or maybe there are some things that you're really hurt that happened to you and you notice there's a little distance or sourness towards God. Or I feel like this isn't one that's talked about a lot, is when we are only governed by our fear of God and we are completely disconnected from his love. And we only see God as a disciplinarian, or we only see God as our governing Lord. We don't see him as savior. We don't see him as protector or comforter. And if you're missing those components, you're allowing space for a gap that the enemy can slide in and create bigger space and division in. And once that division sets in, it just creates the perfect breeding ground for you to find yourself further and further away from God. When I went through my season of like losing my connection with God and distancing myself from God, it didn't happen overnight. It wasn't I woke up one morning and there it is, I am no longer in alignment with God. It happened from a single little wedge, and that space just grew over and over and over. And it kept getting bigger and it kept getting filled. It wasn't just space. It was being filled with the voices of people who didn't have my best interests at heart, or people who weren't in alignment with God themselves. And so their voices became louder to me than God's voice, which ultimately led to me pushing myself away from God. Sometimes we say God left us, but if we really are honest with ourselves, God doesn't leave. He stays the same. He's the same God then, he's the same God now. We ultimately are the ones that take the steps back. We are ultimately the ones that keep closing the door when he's trying to speak to us, or we're the ones pushing him away, either because of offense, trauma, hurt, or something that we haven't dealt with. And that kind of leads me to that next part. The second part of how all of this creates a chaos and turmoil and ultimately unfulfillment in our relationships with other people. When your relationship with God is shaky and there's division there, it's going to trickle down to you, your relationship with yourself. I know everyone loves talking about self-love, but before you get to this point of self-love, you have to take inventory of what's already inside you. So everything that comes out of you is only a reflection of what's already inside you. If your relationship with God is shaky, then your relationship with yourself is shaky, because you start defining yourself by what other people tell you, which I just gave an example of, or if you're not believing the promises that God has said about you, you're not believing that he has your best interests at heart. You're not believing that you were fearfully and wonderfully made, because you don't believe in him and you don't believe what the word says about him. Then it starts misconstruing everything that you know to be true about yourself. And you start taking on the labels of society, taking on labels of what your family says, taking on labels of what your friends say. And not all of those labels are accurate. And some of them may sound good, but may not be accurate. And if they're not accurate, they're going to lead you down a path that was never intended for you in the first place. So as you can see how that gap is starting to get bigger and bigger. And not only that, it creates cracks in the foundation of everything else in our lives. If you look at when you take a rock and you throw it at a glass, if the glass doesn't necessarily break immediately, it creates fractures in different directions. And that's exactly what happens when the enemy tries to attack your relationship with God. He throws a rock at it and it creates a wedge. It creates one little crack, but then those little cracks spread into other things, because then it challenges like, okay, if God says that he is for me, then why did this happen? So that means he's not really for me, or maybe I'm not really worthy, or maybe I'm an exception to his blessings and his promises and his rules. Maybe they don't apply to me. Maybe I'm not worthy. And when you don't feel worthy and you start questioning all those things, the seeds of doubt, the seeds of insecurity, the seeds of self-hate automatically just start filling in that gap. And it starts to be groomed and nurtured by the voices of other people, Sometimes it's also voices of ourselves, what we're saying to ourselves. That's why I'm so big on positive affirmations and affirmations in general, that you're speaking life over yourself and not speaking doubt or fear or anxiety. You have to speak healing over yourself. You have to speak motivation over yourself. There's not always going to be somebody in your corner to do it. You have to stand up and rise up to the occasion and love yourself, care about yourself enough to take on that responsibility, until God does bring those people into your space, or until sometimes those people are in your space and you don't perceive them because you're so clouded by what you see about yourself. If I can just be honest right now, I know for a fact that there are some people that I shut off or pushed away because of what I was thinking about myself. I didn't think I was worthy enough, or I didn't think I was, at their level. And I'm like, they don't want nothing to do with me. And who knows the type of blessings that I cut myself off from because I had this inaccurate and skewed view of myself that ultimately had stemmed from a skewed view of how I believed God to see me and my relationship with Him. If you can address your relationship with God, it'll address your relationship with yourself. And this isn't to say that you have to have a 180 change overnight. When you're dealing with your own mind and your own character, that takes time. That takes practice. That takes repetitive behaviors and repetitive affirmations. It takes repetitive and intentional steps towards healing and growing and becoming a healthier person mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. All areas of who you are. And if the enemy can attack who you think and know yourself to be, then he doesn't have to send other attacks, because you'll start tearing yourself down for him. You'll start tearing down your future and your relationships and your career for him. He won't have to do any of that because you start self-sabotaging. A lot of times we start to sabotage ourselves, but we're blaming it on other people. Sometimes it shows up in the self-fulfilling prophecy. We keep saying that, oh, people don't love me, but we don't even realize that we're acting in a way that causes people to distance themselves, or we're pushing people away. And then we say, see, I knew you were going to leave. And we won't turn the mirror to ourselves, and we have complete, utter unawareness of, oh, it's my behaviors that I've been engaging in. I've been pushing people away who have been trying to love me, or I get easily offended when they were actually giving me feedback that was from a gentle and compassionate place. And that's what happens when you haven't dealt with your trauma or your past. That's what happens when you haven't dealt with your pain and your grief, because then you start seeing every single person as an attack or a threat, and you start questioning everyone else's integrity. And you start questioning whether or not you can actually open yourself up again, because the last time you did that, you were hurt, you were betrayed, you were misused and taken advantage of. That's the problem with undealt with trauma, grief, pain, mental health concerns in general. It starts to spill over in everything else. It starts to change how you see yourself and how you see others. And this is where the connection happens between ourselves and how we view ourselves, and then others. Because then we start to show up in relationships in unhealthy ways. If you are insecure and wounded and spiritually dry, that is exactly what's going to show up in your relationships. And if you don't take accountability and get serious about working on yourself and dealing with your internal demons and your internal brokenness, it's going to continue to happen time and time again. And you will live a life thinking all along it was them, when in actuality it was you. And there was a level of accountability that you did not take that allowed this pattern of behavior to play out in your relationships. What does this look like? It looks like miscommunication. It looks like jealousy. It looks like feeling as though others are against you, or they are jealous of you, or they just hate us. Yeah, we do have haters sometimes, okay? I get it. But sometimes you're creating a narrative that is so far from the truth because you are so blinded by your pain and your hurt and your resentment and your bitterness. Or check this out, on the other hand, you might just be blinded by arrogance because you're thinking so highly of yourself that you're stepping on everyone else around you, and you've created yourself into being God. And you've disregarded the God that created you because you've had this inflated sense of self, which is probably from you trying to protect yourself from getting hurt or taken advantage of. And then you start misusing other people, and then you're left with people who only stick around because of what they can get from you. And they're not genuine, and they're not there for you, but they keep you company because they know that at the end of the day, all we got to do is stroke her ego or stroke his ego a little bit, and he's going to blow money on this, or he's going to blow money on that, because you're starting to equate your success, your perceived success, and your perceived splendor and grandiosity with, oh, I'm such an important person, and this inflated sense of self, and how I can pay for the whole bill, and I can do this and I can do that. And you are completely oblivious that your insecurities are bleeding all over the place because you have things within yourself that you haven't dealt with. You haven't recognized that that literally, I believe it's like Luke 6. I think it's Luke 6. Don't quote me. Search the whole Bible, you'll find it. But I think it's Luke 6 that says, like, out of the abundance, the mouth speaks. That is so true. And it's not just what you say. It's not just what you speak. And I believe that with that statement, Jesus wanted us to know that it's not just what you speak, but it's also what you do and how you treat people. How you treat people is a reflection of what's in your heart. If you're treating people with a short temper and bitterness, that's what's in your heart. If you're treating people as if they're less than, or you are challenging people who are trying to love on you, and you're accusing them of all these awful things that are not even remotely accurate, that's a reflection of what's in you that you need to deal with, that you need to search out and address before it takes control of your entire life. And it's decades later and you're realizing, dang, all along, it was me. It was me, oh Lord. It was me. It was me that was messing up. It was me that was self-sabotaging. It was me that was seeing everyone through a broken eye. And I couldn't see their genuineness. And my discernment was all over the place because the voices, the gaps that I allowed to grow were so big that they clouded my judgment. They clouded my discernment. They clouded me being able to hear and see people's intentions for what they really are, which is the compassion and which is the comfort. Now, is it a guarantee that you're not going to get hurt? No. There are going to be times when you get hurt. There are going to be times when people betray you. There are going to be times when you decide to, give trust or give love another try, and you end up getting hurt. Unfortunately, we live in a broken world with other hurt people and other people who haven't dealt with their stuff, and we encounter them and we rub up against them and we end up hurting each other. Sometimes we're so focused on our own pain, we don't realize how we hurt other people too, and how our brokenness and someone else's brokenness came together and created a whole mess. And we both left each other damaged or hurt in some way or offended in some way, which is why it's important for you to become a healthier person. So not only you can attract healthier people, but also so when you see that brokenness, you don't take offense to it so easily. You can recognize that, oh, that's something in you. So I'm going to give you love, even though you're giving me hate right now. I can give you love and sincerity to start planting a seed in that gap that's in your heart that will flourish into love and compassion and forgiveness. Sometimes I love the saying that you might be the only Bible that someone may ever see, or you may be the only glimpse of Jesus someone might see. And that's so true if you think about it. And it also like softens your heart. It makes me a little mushy inside when I think about, okay, I really want to go off on you, but you may not ever like encounter God's love because you are so bitter or broken, or you are hearing God's love through a broken ear. So let me show up on his behalf and show you the love that he actually wants to extend to you. Then I'm gonna leave you in Jesus' hands because he's still working on me, okay? All right. Now, what comes next after that? Okay? It's taking inventory. Taking inventory of where are you in your relationship with God? Where are you in relationship with yourself? What are you speaking over yourself with thoughts? What's the quality of your thoughts? A lot of times we talk about intrusive thoughts in therapy. When you take a moment to really examine them, a lot of the times, I'm tempted to say all of the times, those intrusive thoughts are coming from another voice. Not just like the enemy's voice, but sometimes it's the voice of your mom who was speaking hate over you or jealousy, or maybe it's the voice of your past failed relationships and the guilt or the shame or embarrassment that you're still harboring from that. Sometimes those intrusive thoughts are actually coming from a voice from the past, related to your trauma, related to your grief, related to your disappointments, related to your frustrations or unresolved anger, whatever it might be. Take inventory of them, identify where they're coming from, and then challenge them. And write this out. Don't just think about it. Write it out. There's so much power when you see something written, or when you are actually engaged in the thought process and processing it, not just physically through the writing, but also emotionally and mentally. It allows you to slow down to really connect with what you're feeling internally. And then lastly, take inventory of your relationships. Be vulnerable enough, challenge yourself this week to be vulnerable enough to ask your friends, your loved ones, your family, whomever it might be that's in your inner circle, how do you experience me? How am I showing up in our relationship? Ask extended family members, how am I showing up in our relationship? What do you perceive of me? What do you receive from me? And don't be so quick to get defensive if they say, girl or boy, you arrogant sometimes, but I love you. Don't dismiss the I love you and just focus on the arrogance. Sit back and before responding, think about how have you showed up as arrogance with them. Or maybe they say you are so unforgiving and you cut people off with a drop of a hat. Before you get offended and say, well, you know what, I can show you I cut you off at the drop of a hat. Sit back and say, okay, let me look at the areas of my life where I've cut people off quickly. Regardless of why, let me just look at when I made those decisions, how often I make those decisions, because the frequency shows the pattern. And then also the reason behind it. Was there no grace that you extended? Were there areas and relationships that you had in the past that you became offended and you were so focused on that offense that you didn't extend grace, you didn't extend forgiveness, and you only focused on the anger and the bitterness, and there was no room for communication and resolving those issues? That is you guys' challenge for the week. I will be doing the same thing. And if nothing else, remember, faith helps, and have a lovely Valentine's Day. Bye, yo.